So now we have discussed as much as we want to discuss on the matter of istihada. The ruling is, if she is not in menstruation, she is in istihada period. If she is in istihada period, she does wudu for every salah. Even, let's say someone who is istihada, there are 10 minutes left to Maghrib, she hasn't prayed Asr. She does wudu, cleans the blood, does wudu, and prays Asr. By the time she finishes, few minutes later, Maghrib starts. What does she do? She does wudu, clean herself, does wudu, and she prays Maghrib. Now up to Isha, unless she has other nawaqid of wudu, other invalidators of wudu, such as passing wind or she going to sleep, something else happened, okay. Ahnaf, in their madhab, the bleeding breaks the wudu, not in other madhab. Hanbali madhab says if it's a lot of bleeding. But in general, Ahnaf, the bleeding breaks the wudu, right? Other madhahib, the normal bleeding doesn't break the wudu, but the bleeding from the private part does break the wudu. So, if someone follows the Hanafi madhab, she has istihada problem, she did wudu for salah, but she bled from nose, or she bled from her face or her hand. This is not the excuse bleeding, is it? It's not excuse bleeding. So Ahnaf would say she needs to do wudu again. This is like passing the wind or something. Other madhahib, obviously we've discussed that in detail, they don't consider bleeding to be the invalidator of wudu. But this is everything for istihada. Before I move on, now we're going to move on to the chapter of Salah, a very important chapter. We have covered wudu, we have covered ghusl, we have covered menstruation, everything we need to do to make sure we are clean. All of that was to make sure when we pray Salah, we know how to do wudu, what makes us break the wudu, what invalidates wudu, what doesn't, and what not. So up to this point in fiqh, everything is to do with making sure we are clean and ready to pray Salah. The next chapter is the chapter of Salah. And that's a big chapter. That's the most important ibadah, our physical ibadah, the most important physical ibadah in our life. Can we not do that, please? Yeah. Most important ibadah in our life. So, before we continue, any question on istihada?